Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back for another EVE Online video. Welcome back also to GTA 4, the largest trade hub in EVE Online, for another market video. In this one I want to take a look at two ship classes. Number one, the mining ships, and then also the transport ships. I received a donation, you could say, in game from a player that's quitting EVE Online, so we got lots of stuff all over the place. It was really geared towards industry and I now need to do some moving and things like that. Gave me the idea to take a look at those two segments, because number one, we know that the mining ships are going to change. CCP is planning a rebalance of these mining changes, probably Q4 of this year, and that could be very interesting speculation wise. And then of course for transportation, I need to do a lot of it, and so I'm actually looking at some of the toys that I was given and things like that as well. Especially Tech 2 could be pretty interesting. So let's dive in. Let's go to the market, look for ships, and start with the mining barges. The basically very specialized mining ships, of course. I don't think that we'll touch, maybe we'll take a quick look at, so we get frigates, and then I think they're in standards, or yeah, there we go. So for ore, we've got the Venture, alright, going up in price on a pretty big volume spike, but we are talking, of course, one of the most basic mining ships for any starting player, costing less than $500,000 ISK. Really not that expensive, although at the moment, on a little bit of a lack of fresh supply, it is costing quite a little bit compared to the buy prices, but expect that to be rectified decently quickly on some new supply. We can also take a look, I think, at the expedition frigate. So we've got two mining ships as well in the frigate class that are mostly, I think, used for gas mining. The Endurance, for instance, costing around 25 million to buy, and is pretty much average, maybe slightly expensive at the moment. And I may show this here as well in my completed trades. On this upswing here, I have made a trade as well in the Endurance, bought for less than 20 million, sold at 24.5, so that's definitely pretty nice. And then the next one is the Prospect, that's also costing around 25 million at the moment. Yep, 24 now for most sellers, 23 for the buyer. So a little bit of volatility, not as much as I would like to see, but definitely pretty good for me, considering the trades that I've made. We should have a Prospect here as well. You can see 21 million for the purchase, 25 for the sale. This is after taxes, 4 million profit, or almost 25% on the buy price. So it's okay, although it is not that great. 20%, excuse me, on the buy price. It's okay, but it's not that great a trade. There's definitely bigger margins to hunt for. Unfortunately, in Tech 2, that is not exactly what's happening. But these, I would say, clearly up in the last couple of weeks. For me, another small indication that the summer is ending and that activity is picking back up in EVE Online. If we go for the mining barges, we'll start with Tech 1 here as well. 40 million for a Coveter, feels like it is again pretty average, with some volumes at the tail end here, late August, that are quite surprising. And we're talking 38 million for the sellers, 36 for the buyers. Very nice availability, quite a few Coveters on the market. And for a Tech 1 ship, this actually feels like a pretty reasonable price. The Procure is going for a little bit less than 40 million. After the May spike here on the industry changes, we've recovered, and we're basically still paying a slight premium from before the industry changes. So this also feels like pretty average, but not like it's completely gone down the drain on no activity or anything like that. 38 million again for the sellers, 34 for the buyers. Definitely quite doable. And then the Retriever has lost a little bit more, right? Started the year here at 30 million, but most of the year traded just below 40. And then we got again the April rush, of course, on anything Tech 1, became very expensive on the more expensive minerals. That lasted for, well, almost 2 months at around 50 million is. Then we get the summer decline, And contrary to the Coveter and the Procurer, we are down to like way less than 40 million, 36 for the sellers, 32 for the buyers. So a little bit less than average here for the Retriever, but overall a decently, I would say, robust Tech 1 mining market coming out of the summer. Now for the Tech 2 ships, this is where speculation could be happening if there's any of these ships that could become like the best miners out there if, for instance, they nerf the Orca and Orcal into the ground when it comes to their mining capabilities. These could of course become the new high-end toys that everyone wants, and here the Hulk to me feels like it's a little bit depressed. We're clearly lacking the same volatility that we saw in the frigate class of miners, and at the moment the Hulk is costing 260 million for the sellers, 256 million for the first buyer, but going down to less than 250 pretty quickly, and you can see that we actually have like a pretty steep low to almost 230 million, so some pressure on that Hulk market is definitely present, with no real room for it to boom out to like 330 million like it did around the industry changes on a little bit more speculation. So I would personally say if we can lose this 256 and 252, buy a Hulk below 250 million ISK, that's definitely the lower end of the chart. Looks like something that I may personally keep an eye out for, because I do believe that if CCP decides to nerf the Orca, this should be very, very good for this class of mining ships. Then we've got the Machina that maybe is already preemptively doing this. You can see we are very close to 1 year high point, jumping in just the last week or so from around 250 million to 300 million ISK for the Machina, 290 now for the sellers and 261 million for the buyers. This is definitely pretty interesting as well. These buyers being pushed up very rapidly in a matter of just a couple of days. Quite a bit of interest all of a sudden in the Machina, and this maybe historically is something that I should mention here as well. Back in the days when I first started playing the game, the Hulk was like my end game goal, the best mining ship. It had 3 high slots for mining turrets, had by far the best yield, but also had a decently competitive cargo hold, so it could actually be used solo-wise. Now the Hulk has lost a little bit of that because of its cargo capacity, and for a solo player like me, the Machina was actually my favorite ship up until the Orca got the ability to mine through mining drones, and this really is something that is still the case, I think, when it comes to that balance, right? Still having a good yield but enough tank and to be solo friendly, the Machina still wins out over the Hulk, and as a result I think there is a little bit more interest in that right now. And then finally we come to the Skiff that is basically still super expensive, unlike the Hulk that went up really sharply here in May, April, May. That is of course the industry changes. Machina, same thing, but again more aggressively. You've got that early April bump right here in the Machina. That's definitely more speculative, more interest in that Machina than in the Hulk. Right here before the Hulk actually made moves, which is also again interesting. If you look at this chart, right, Machina just had a jump, but the Hulk jumped like a month later, so there may definitely be room for some upwards price changes for the Hulk there. But the Skiff, it did jump up here in March, April as well, up to 250 million, but it's just still, because of its tankiness, a very, very popular ship that still goes for like 280 million ISK, despite the fact that it is basically the lowest yield of these Tech 2 exhumers. And so the Skiff is currently selling for 282 million ISK, buyers coming in at 266 million. Definitely pretty expensive if we're looking on this 1 year chart, but again, if we're speculating on what CCP may do to the mining ships, tankiness may become even more important. If for instance they want to decide to nerf like the ability to escape, their agility, things like that, the Skiff could reign supreme at that point. And so it's all speculation, but from the chart's perspective I would say the Hulk is in an interesting place if they want to make this one, which I think industry wise is the most expensive one. Then if they want to make this one king of the exhumers and potentially even the whole mining ship segment, then price wise now it does look pretty interesting to try to grab a couple of these. Now we still have one other mining ship that we can check here in GTA 4.4, and that is the Orca, that just like for the skiff, right, tankiness, if you're looking for a big tank, then of course an industrial command ship is so much bigger, so much harder to gank, that it is a lot more interesting. So it has that same pattern, jumping early April from let's see here, what's this average price? 1.1 billion to above 1.5 billion, but throughout the entire summer it keeps building and stays in a band of pretty much 1.7 to 2 billion ISK. At the moment it's costing almost 1.8 billion for the sellers, 1.7 billion for the buyers. And here there is also a different explanation as to why it's still so expensive. That is of course that it is far larger. And so if we look for, let's see here, the actual blueprint at the moment, if we do view in industry, it does have a lot of these new materials, auto integrity preservation seal, core temperature regulators, and life support backup systems that make them a lot more expensive. And in fact, we're still in that reverse situation. Estimated input material cost almost 1.9 billion, estimated output 1.8 billion. So it's still not economical to make a lot of Orcas, which is why we're having a lot of trouble moving my BPCs of the Orca that I am producing at the moment. So this one is super expensive also because of the industry changes. I do think that when it comes to the Tech2 ships, these exhumers, it is a little bit of a different story. So also I do get the feeling that eventually we are going to close that gap a little bit more, that it has been closing on mostly the materials becoming less expensive. The ships, as you can see here, are still just as expensive compared to a year ago because of these industry changes. The Rorqual, I don't think we have to look at that since it can't really be traded here. That is still not available in HiSec. But when it comes to mining ships, I would say it's interesting to try and speculate on what may happen. And the biggest risk, of course, is that the Orca may lose a lot of mining capabilities. I use it at the moment when it comes to solo mining because it has this, right? It can use these drone mining drones with actually a very competitive mining yield, I would say, even to the Tech2 exhumers. And as a result, it's also so much bigger. It has all of these extra cargo holds. So it's really almost a mobile base of operation. It still makes it very popular, but lose that mining capability. And yeah, it's going to lose a lot of interest, I think, and potentially it could crash down in price quite substantially. Now, I've always said that I'm hoping that that does not happen. Because I personally do see the Orca being like capital class, you could say. Some people say it's not a capital ship, although it requires capital components, but it's definitely like that end game goal, you could say, for a miner to reach for in HiSec, to eventually fly their own Orca, use that for mining and use that for maybe transportation and things like that. So I look forward to, for instance, having the Orca be able to compress stuff. That could be very, very interesting, but overall I would hope that it's still a mining ship as well that you can take into the belt and actively mine even as a solo player. But there is a chance, of course, that if they nerf the Rorqual's capability for mining even more, that the Orca will have to follow suit as well, and then these exhumers will of course become the go-to ship for the active part, you could say, of mining, although it's always pretty passive, but at least to shoot those rocks may no longer be done by the Orca and the drones and then by the exhumers. And that is when these exhumers, especially that Hulk, does look potentially like a very profitable purchase. But it is pure speculation, of course. We have absolutely no idea as to what CCP is planning exactly. Then I said that we're also going to take a look at the transport ships, and I'm actually going to start with the large ones here. So let's start with capital ships and then the freighters. First of all, take a look at the chart. Very similar to the Orca, of course, and you can guess why, because it's so much more expensive to produce these. Starts the year at 1.5 billion ISK, is currently going for 3.3 billion ISK for a Providence, and then the buyers are coming in at 3.3 billion as well. So there's really a lot of demand, and these Providences are still considered to be very cheap, despite being on a one-year high point on this chart pretty much. And the reason for that, let's take a quick look at industry and then go to the blueprint view in industry is that this is way worse than even the Orca. 6.4 billion estimated input cost and then 3.2 billion estimated output cost. Completely uneconomical to be producing that. But what's really interesting to me here is that this is the major culprit, I think. Capital core temperature regulator, 4.1 billion billion ISK for a single item to produce. The rest of them are, yeah, there's bound to be some others, but we're talking 200 million, 400 million, 300 million. That's definitely in a completely different range from this capital core temperature regulator. And then if we look at this one for industry, should be able to do that as well. View in industry, that is because it requires 250 core temperature regulators and then some PI. So this is another example. If you watch Eve talk, I keep mentioning that advanced PI has that inherent extra demand after the industry changes that is keeping those prices up. Here's an example of that: integrity response drones and self-harmonizing power cores, 150 needed just to build a single very expensive component of these capital ships. And this does seem to be a little bit the bottleneck. It's these guys down here, these core temperature regulators, that are still extremely expensive. 3 billion in estimated input cost, and then it costs 4 billion on the market at the moment to make these. And that's really, if we didn't have this item when it comes to the Providence, let's go back to that one. View in industry, if we could remove the 4 billion cost here, we'd be talking 2.3 billion, 3.2 billion, definitely a little bit more in line with what we would expect an industry process to do in EVE Online. And so this one is super, super expensive, making the input cost double the estimated value of the output cost. And another explanation, of course, as to why. Number one, these are so expensive, above 3 billion ISK for a freighter. Number two, why these buyers are so aggressive. Look at that, just like a 100 million ISK margin on something that costs 3 billion ISK is very, very narrow. And then number three, of course, why I'm not selling any blueprints, BPCs of these ships either. I'm really curious to know how this is going to evolve. It's pretty obvious that here either the production cost has to come down quite massively, or the actual cost of the ships after we go through everything that was built, of course, here in the April rush, will get absorbed by the market, and then we could be going even higher for these freighters. Fenrir also above 3 billion ISK, and then finally we get the bowhead. I think it's just as bad, way above 3 billion ISK as well. So the freighters are still super expensive, and honestly, unless CCP really also in Q4, this is not related to the mining changes then, but to the end of scarcity, starts making some of these items more available, we are in for even higher prices for the freighters. So personally, I kind of expect that this is also another thing where the end of scarcity, where CCP's changes will in all likeliness not involve the good old minerals, right? I think they're pretty happy with where those are at and making them even more available. For instance, with the mining changes, even bigger yields on those. Don't expect anything like that, but if they're going to change something, more fights on the books, and then these new items, of course, and the raw materials for that may be on the books as well for lower prices. So at least the active parts of all of these items that are still super expensive and basically making industry in these large ships uneconomical. Then we got another segment for industry ships or transport ships, which are these industrial ships. I'll dive into the advanced one first. I think Tech 2 can be pretty interesting as well. So let's start here with Amar that have the Impel and then the Prorator. So the Impel at the moment is going for 230 million ISK, 210 for the buyers, pretty expensive. What I do like here is how volatile this does seem. Low point 180 million, high point 280 million. That's definitely tradable. This is tradable. This is tradable. This dip is buyable. So this I like just from the general Tech 2 perspective. If you're looking for active trading, I love the Tech 2 ship market. With that one warning, of course, up until this late summer, we've clearly seen these high points go lower and lower and the low points higher and higher. So we've lost a lot of volatility. If I would be buying now, it would be at like really low price points, like breaking at least the low points of the summer, and then I'd have a medium term horizon. Right? During this period, you could try to buy very quickly below 200 million, and then hope that next week you can sell above 250 million, making a very nice profit of 50 million in a matter of days. That's not going to happen at the moment, but it's good to see that the volatility has existed here as well, and that potentially with the summer ending, we could be in for better trading times in Take-Two ships. So looking out for the good buying deals at the moment, I think makes a lot of sense. And then the prorator actually quite surprising, doing a mid-August spike as well above 180 million, low point 130. This is definitely pretty nice for trading as well, with at the moment sellers coming in at 129 below 130 and buyers at 123, and this is all the buyers that are at. So this is for me a prime example if you want to be ready medium term, to be ready for CCP's announcements and potentially increased activity in EVE Online. This is a chart that you're looking for, right? This is like the low point since the summer. We're touching 130. We're actually seeing sellers below 130 million trying to buy a cheap prorator at the moment. Makes economically, I think, a lot of sense not to sell next week, which you could have done here, which you could have done here and then here, but to sell like later down the line. Very, very interesting chart. Definitely something that I may look into myself. Then we've got the Bustard also going down on really large volumes. Interesting again, lowest price point since the summer. I did not expect to see that much of this, but yeah, 230 million for the sellers, 215 for the buyers. And if you try to get 215 to show up here, it's all the way down here. Those buyers are definitely buying at a really cheap price. Another interesting chart for some preparation. Even the crane is going down as well now, hasn't moved below the low point of July, so this one may be a little bit early unless we're below 150. We're at the 150 mark for the sellers, 156 for the buyers. Again, these are the buyers and these are the sellers. Way more supply than demand, putting pressure on these Tech2 industrial ships. I think potentially creating some interesting investment opportunities. Then for Galente, yeah, definitely not as quick and as low as we would like to see, so not as juicy a chart. Buyers are below 200 million, but you can see potentially here we went to 180, so this one doesn't feel that good. Also way bigger volumes, I get the idea. Let's take a quick look at that. Yeah, double the volumes of these. So potentially for Galente stuff, a little bit more stable, a little bit more stability. Viator again going down, but not at the low point since the summer, so this I would not make a move on this. And again, almost 50 a day, definitely a little bit more popular. And then let's take a look at the Mastodon. Yeah, definitely showcasing that difficult summer here with a spike up in May, which was probably a response to the industry changes. And then we've got that slow descent, and we're finally breaking down below 230 million though, but I would need to see like 200 come into play before we make a move on this one. Well, 202 for the buyers, 223 for the sellers. That's a nice margin that has opened up here again on a lack of demand. Honestly, a Mastodon as close as possible to 200 million does make a lot of sense to me. And the Prowler falling down as well to its lowest point since the summer. And are we below 140 for those buyers? 130 again on no demand. Very, very interesting, despite the fact that, in my opinion, moving stuff around is going to become far more important, especially if CCP comes out with a dynamic system where resources will no longer just be available forever and ever in a single spot, but you may have to move around in order to chase them. Transportation should take an even more important place in EVE Online, and despite that we are seeing quite a few opportunities, I would say, for some cheap Tech2 ships, except for the Galente. But let's quickly take a look at the standard ones then, because there is potentially a reason for that. You can see here Amar has Bestower and the Sigil. I'm not expecting too much here. We are talking ships that are easy to produce, costing less than a couple million ISK here for the Bestower, for instance, and for the Sigil. So a bit of pressure on the price, below 3 million. Definitely quite affordable. Then we've got for Caldari, we've got the Badger and the Tyra. Yeah, also going below 2 million at the moment, so very inexpensive. But what's the difference? In Galente, and just the Galente skills, you've got 5 ships and so that gives you a little bit more options. And so I think for when it comes to transport ships, Galente may have an edge just because of how many ships those skills allows you to fly. Thus you get increased volumes, and thus you get a bit more stability in that Tech 2 market. And the reason is that we do have some interesting, I think, cargo holds. You see PI, planetary commodity hold, so specialized ship for PI is the Epital. Then what's the Cryos for a mineral cargo hold, right? If you happen to have a lot of titanium, well, this one has a specialized hold for that, and an ore hold as well. Definitely interesting ships that I think make the Galente skill line and does Tech 2 ships a bit more popular in general. So that's the reason I think why we're lacking that volatility in the Caldari advanced industrial ships. So Itron Mark V here, also look at that, 2.5 million, very, very affordable. Cryos below 2 million, Miasmos 2.5, Nereos 2.5. There's really not much to say. Minmatar, we can take a quick look at that, but expect these average normal prices, basically completely absorbing whatever may have happened in April and being small enough to not really having been impacted too much by that. One exception, here is the Wraith. Sudden volume increases bring the price up above 3 million. Now we're going down quite quickly. Look at that, 2.7 million already for the seller. So any gap gets plugged very quickly by fresh supply, but sometimes you get a little bit of volatility, but this is not something that I would want to trade in. You'd need to buy like 100 of these just to make up for a single Tech 2 trade, and you're not going to drop 100 of them at this point of 3 million. There's other players that are going to come in and plug that gap. So yeah, for the Tech 1 ships, honestly quite affordable, and showing that explanation as to why the Galente ships and the Galente Tech 2 ships are a bit more popular, I think. If I'm not mistaken, this one has an ammo bay capacity, but yeah, are you in need of a specialized ship just to move your munitions? Honestly, no. So yeah, the Galente do have the edge there. The industrial command ship, if I'm not mistaken, is the Orca. We saw that one, but then also the Porpoise. We can take a quick look at that one. This could be kind of interesting as well. So this is also potentially a mining ship. It can use mining drones and has a yield bonus for that one. Pretty expensive, 92 million for the sellers, 83 million for the buyers, compared to like a Tech 1 transport ship, but on this chart also quite affordable. And my personal speculation is that we could get like a very specific compression for the Porpoise. If I were a betting man, which I'm not, but if I had to guess as to what CCP could do for that, it is to give the Rorqual moon mining compression, to give the Orca regular ore compression, and then to give the Porpoise gas compression, and that could be very, very interesting for the Porpoise, and thus jumping in here could be very interesting speculation wise as well. Another possibility is that it builds up, and that would be far less interesting for the Porpoise. For instance, Porpoise gets gas compression, that's it. Orca gets gas and ores, and then the Rorqual would get gas, ores, and moon ores as being able to compress that. That's also a possibility, which would of course be far better for the Orca and far better for the Rorqual, and not that interesting, I think, for the Porpoise. That's a little bit of pure speculation on my part. Again, I have absolutely no idea what CCP is planning, but we know that changes are planned for these ships. And so looking at the current prices, if you're feeling like you want to take a gamble, honestly, some Porpoise purchases could be kind of interesting as well. And there we go. I didn't expect this to take almost half an hour, but this is another look at the market, focusing this time on the mining ships, which we know are going to change, and then the industry ships, of which, well, the Tech 2 ones seem to be moving quite volatilely, so you can definitely do some trading there. And then the large ones still need to absorb all of these changes, especially those freighters, still twice as expensive to make than what they're going for at the moment. So that's not good news for my Blueprint copy business. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and as always, I'll see you next time.